Do you like engines? Do you like to talk about engines? Then you're at the right place. From Engines 101 to practices that can help you in your machine shop, we have something for you. Welcome to the Engine Professional Podcast.
Well, Chuck, isn't technology kind of cool? I mean, here we are, we're 2,000 miles away from each other, and literally it's like we're across the desk, just like the pros do it. So, this whole podcast deal, to be that far away and to still have this kind of technology really, it makes our life a lot easier, that's for sure.
So true. COVID changed that for a lot more people than us, but we've been practicing some of this stuff for a long time, right? But some of the things that maybe got refined because of COVID and allowed us to do it even better, Teams and Zoom meetings and so forth. I mean, it's come secondhand. I remember actually Steve and I working on a project when I was on a day off. I was out at a big cookout with some friends, and I'm doing a Teams meeting by a lake, cooking food. It's just amazing what you can do now and be productive anytime, anywhere.
No, so true. And like you said, with COVID, I mean, it's almost like a lot of us have had to become content creators in a way. And not that we're any good at it per se, but I mean, the technology has allowed us to at least have that platform so that we can do webinars and we can do podcasts and anything virtual and visual and that kind of stuff. So it's, like you say, it's really opened up the doors for us to be able to reach our members and reach our listeners and just get the information out there.
That's a fact. I hate reality TV in one sense of all the scripted stuff, right? So there's a great opportunity there, like the auto shows and stuff, maybe not quite as bad, but there's a lot of the scripted stuff. But anyway, I think we learned from that. And I have the impression that a lot of people they like the realism, like you and I sitting here having this conversation,
Right.
They know everyone puts their pants on one leg at a time. Nobody hangs it on a nail and jumps in. It makes it real. So yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah. And, speaking of us, again, stuff that we got on the go that, again, since COVID and things since things have freed up a whole bunch, we've really added to our regionals and our shows and stuff that we're trying to get out to face as well. We're not just all about, the podcasts and the webinars. We literally are trying to get out to see our members face to face. And I just, having a quick peek at what we've got on the go here in the next little while, looking at the first one that we're going to have for this year, we're going to be at Liberty Engine Parts out in Dallas, Texas. And I know, Chuck, you're speaking at that one, and that's shaping up to be a great event.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. And, we always have great folks that'll jump in and help us out with presentations. There's some of the names that are always known, come out and help, but there's been some shakeups in the industry. You got some names there right in front of you, Rob. You want to share?
Yeah, I know Kale, Kale from Melling, he's going to be speaking at the Liberty one. And, Dart will be at Liberty as well as UEM. And then it looks like you're rounding off the day. And then you're, like you say yourself, you'll be the last one of the day. And so, yeah, looking forward to Liberty. That'll be the first one coming up here pretty quick. After that, Chuck, you and I will actually be face to face along with Steve. And we're going to be at the, at the homeschool conference in Dayton, Ohio. And that's March 20th through 22nd. And that's also shaping up really good. I know Cass Choate, he'll also be there. Cass has a shop out in Bolivar, Tennessee. And he actually employs homeschool employees. So he's a great reference to have there at the conference.
Yeah. Gentleman joining us, Rankin Barnes.
Yeah.
With the Cranking Engines program for the youngsters out there. So that was really fun last year when we first were introduced to him. So he's going to be joining us again. Good times.
Wasn't it cool? Like we had him last year and Rankin had this little Briggs and Stratton engine and he had like a little cork that went in the top on a string and he had a cordless drill and the kids would come along and they would get to work the drill. And of course it would come up on the compression stroke and he would pop that cork nearly 30 feet in the air and the kids would run around and catch it. But wasn't that, I mean, just a neat way to get the kids involved is a little tool like that.
Yeah, they don't even know that they're learning, physics, and it's terrific to see the excitement. We had to create a line, put them all in queue.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to be chaos,
Exactly.
They could have their turn. And something so simple, but it tells us, it's sending the message. It's technical. Again, it's physics, we're learning about compression so you can get them slowed down enough to have those conversations. There were really good conversations that came out last year. And, he's a good guy to follow too, because he shares a lot of cool stuff. And he came from the repair industry as well. So he talks our language very intently.
Exactly. And he caters to that younger crowd because he has a program, a Briggs and Stratton, sort of introductory to engines programs. It kind of follows up hand in hand with our program. Ours is a little bit for the older kids and for adults. So he's a great addition to the booth. So there's that one, and we'll see everybody there. And then Steve and I are actually going to be over in Amsterdam, May 2nd and 3rd, and that's going to be at the FTF Machines. This particular company has asked us to collaborate with them this year and join them. They represent equipment like Rottler, Surdy, Comic, and those kind of things. And they're going to have all of their equipment set up so that you can do a demo on it, as well as a typical regional like we would have with technical presentations. So that's a 2-day event. So I know you'll miss that one, Chuck, but Steve's going to join us there, and I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, that should be a great experience for everyone. Maybe a chance to meet some new people and bring them into the fold, with membership. Or, they always say it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I tell you what, that's the best thing about these Tech and Skills regionals is, get to meet folks face to face and create more, relationships that build us all up.
Yeah, and with it being in Amsterdam, that's such an easy, little train ride or plane ride for the folks in the UK as well. So it'll be easy for them to get over to that one. So again, looking forward to that in May. And then something else we're doing, Chuck, this year that's a little bit new for us is we're doing our own thing. AERA is doing their own regional in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada this year on June 7th. So it's going to be at the Doubletree Hilton. That's in West Edmonton. I know we're trying to finalize a few things, but there is going to be a tour of the OEM Cat Reman plant. And I know that place is first class. So again, for all the Canadian folks out there, we're coming your way. And that's in June. So that'll be in Edmonton.
Yeah, pretty industrial area, right, Rob? Because I've worked there, worked in Spruce Grove, been to Regina, for Caterpillar and so forth. Yeah, great part of Canada to, support like the automotive machine jobs and so forth. What did you say? Something that's kind of like the Texas of Canada, right? There's the oil fields are in the north and so forth.
Exactly. Edmonton is very oil driven, and it is like Alberta is kind of our Texas of Canada. So it's looking forward to that one. That's going to be, we haven't been up there before. We haven't done an AERA regional like this in Canada. So we're hoping that in June, all the snow's gone by then. So all the rumors you hear about Canada and the winters, we're definitely you got to put your mosquito repellent on come June. That's the only thing, but we'll be inside. So it's not going to matter for sure.
Pretty exciting.
Yes. And then June 20th, Goodson Tools is celebrating their 80th this year, 80th anniversary. So I know Goodson, they had one several years ago and it was a first class event. So these guys it'll be really, really good, that one.
Yeah, looking forward to that. It's a name that pretty much everyone knows anymore, right? So, I mean, it doesn't matter where you're at. Well, as a matter of fact, I think they're looking for participation in Amsterdam from Goodson. So,
right?
Yeah.
Yep. No, exactly. So that'll be good. So yeah, if anybody wants any of that information, it's all on our website. Any of the regionals, we'd like you to register beforehand so we can at least get a head count as to who's coming and at what event. Also keep in mind there's exhibitors there too. So not only do we have technical presentations, these hosts, they provide lunch, they provide a tour. You have exhibitors that you can talk to, and it's kind of a small venue. So we're at a trade show. Sometimes it's hard to get into the booth to see a vendor. Right here, you've got a one-on-one with that particular rep. And again, it's just a really good event to try and attend.
Yeah, because, so many of our members, they buy through distribution, right? So they know that they use Elgin, Melling, King, you name the part and the manufacturer, but oftentimes they're dealing with someone through distribution. So here's an opportunity to shake hands and have conversation with a representative of the manufacturer. And many times those guys are helping us by doing presentations. So you're probably going to meet that guy who is tech in nature. So again, most of our folks that are coming out for these tech and skills regionals are the in-shop machinists and so forth. So they want to meet these folks who can answer technical questions and, failure analysis type thing. And we've had people bring damaged bearings, blown gaskets, things of that nature, these tech and skills regionals, and want to have a conversation about it. So now you can have a conversation from the tech guys at the manufacturer with your peers in the industry. It's a great thing. You just can't say enough about it.
No, exactly. Everybody comes away from that. I know when I had the shop, sometimes it's difficult to think to yourself, look, I need to make an effort to get out of here. It can be, you don't necessarily want to leave the shop or you feel like you can't leave the shop. But once you actually make the effort to go out to one of these conferences and you come back rejuvenated, you really do. Like you literally have a whole new attitude when you come back to the shop, not only from the stuff that you've learned, but you've actually just gotten away and had that networking opportunity with other peers. I learned more from that to be able to get a business card from even one of my competitors, if you want to say, after meeting, after a handshake and a beer, you'll learn a lot and you come away with some friendships and lifelong opportunities there. It's really
Yeah, that's a fact. It's a lot easier to poke fun at people that you never met.
Exactly.
You put some of the human into it, and then all of a sudden, maybe I do like that guy.
Exactly. Yeah, he's not at all what I thought, or that kind of thing. So no, they're great events to do that. And between all that, I know you and I every day we're answering tech calls. So you'll catch Chuck and I on the phone most of the day, and that's what when we talked about doing this podcast, we thought it would be a great idea to be able to maybe share with the listeners just kind of what goes on day to day in the tech department. We receive over 1,000 calls a month, and they come in. We get them through social media. We get them through WhatsApp. There's email. They're coming from all over the world. So, we thought we kind of just give you a little bit of a run through as to, of those 1,000 calls, how we handle them, what we do from day to day with the information. Chuck, I know you're our main technical guy. I mean, you field a lot of those calls that are equipment related and, some of the sort of the difficult ones, if you want to call it, because you come from that production background. But what are you seeing day to day out there right now?
Well, I think first, as you mentioned, kind of how we manage it. So I know that sometimes people call, they need an answer right now, and we ask for what their membership ID is, and that's just another thing to kind of slow down a little bit. But that's valuable because we're keeping a log. Every call is logged based on your membership ID number, and then we go through, and it's just kind of like process. We have the same lookup that you would have if you're on process. Make, model, application, year. Oftentimes we ask for the engine code because that's becoming more and more helpful, beneficial, as more engines are losing casting numbers and things of that nature. Engine codes are really good to help us drill down. And then we have an area where we record the problem. So when you call and say, hey, I simply meet specifications, those are pretty easy, all information. And we get drop downs that put your email addresses in there, phone numbers, so we can return calls, timestamps it. The whole calls are taken in, the priority they were received, of course, but sometimes things drag out. So it allows us to keep it in front of us so we don't forget. And it also, gives us a place to put tons of notes. So we can put attachments from the call. If you send pictures to us, then we can attach that right to the call and we can refer back to that in the future. And then we're also, we can go back and query any of that data. And what did we share? How did we answer that? And then we look at, at the resolution or whatever, the verbiage we might use. So if we write, we type a statement in there that gets shared, we can go back later and all we have to do is do a word search. So just yesterday, I used one on valve stem seals. So you keep it really simple, initially. So, valve stem seals, and I get all of these records where we got a call, valve steel installed height, who has one, blah, blah, blah. And then you start to look, okay, I'm looking for 6.6 Duramax. So it allows you to start drilling down and say, okay, have we ever had complaints about these seals? Or is there anything unique about it? And you find out, well, there's a tech bulletin about the installation height, the tool that's used to make sure that you don't drive it on too far and damage the seal, blah, blah, blah. So again, when we ask for that number, we're not trying to be a pain in the butt, but it does help us keep organization to all the calls. And in the future, hopefully we're using that to create technical bulletins. We even have a tab that we can select when people call in and they bring something up with, wow, that's a head scratcher. Maybe that should be a bulletin. So, we'll flag those, and as the team we'll discuss later, is it bulletin worthy, or put it back in the queue and let's see if it comes up again in the future. So anyway, that's kind of the management side of it. But as far as, stuff coming in, again, I just mentioned the seal yesterday. I know maybe you had some things in mind too.
Well, I know, like you say, when we go to log those calls, just how helpful it is for us as techs to go back in and look at that reference for later. Like sometimes some of the calls you get just aren't exactly spec related. They're not just like an XYZ spec. It's more somewhat of an opinion. Sometimes the members are calling and just looking for what have other members done in this particular situation. So let's say a minimum head thickness, for example. Well, maybe the spec, that we have calls for a particular head thickness. But as we go into some of these previous calls that we've logged, members have gotten back to us and has said, well, you know what? We actually took an extra 5 thou off that head. We've never had any issues. It's never been a problem. So again, and I was going to mention too, this is what's really helpful for members to also get back to us after the fact, because we do and go update those calls so that we can go in and we learn from them. So that we can help share that information.
Yeah, it's so easy to go find it. Again, we're going to, if we have your number, then we can say, okay, I want to look at all calls from member ID such and such. Oh, here was this date. I can go back in there and then I can go in resolution and say, added this information that helped us solidify the answer. The whole thing about problem solving is that when you find root cause, is it something you can turn on and turn off? So sometimes when we have some of these recommendations and they try it, okay, yeah, that actually fixed it. Okay, if you go back to what you originally had, does the problem come back? So, having data helps us make sure that we can turn the problem off. And so, we definitely look for that feedback. If we know it's tough to get that and pick up the phone and make that call or remember it. And we would forget too if we didn't keep stuff in our queue. So it's a good database.
Exactly. And, there's just some information out there. There's just no specs available from OEM, valve stem heights, for example, are one that's probably our most common call. It's nice to be able to have the member at least give us the measurement that they had. And that way we can put it in the call, which we do. And then that way we've got, like I say, when we get that call about an opinion based, well, we can say we've got 3 members that have reported that particular valve stem height was this particular height. So again, that interaction with who we're talking to on the phone and the member and the back and forth is huge for us. That's a big one for us to learn.
Right. Stem heights is a good example. We had this conversation off. Well, it's really a derivative of the spring heights, which they do tend to share. So whatever impact I'm, by machining the valve seat, it's going to impact the installed stem height as well as the spring height. So we usually get the spring information, not the stem information. So yeah, we have to work together as an association.
Exactly. And, I know a lot of folks are probably wondering, where do we get that information from? What is it we're using as our resource? And we have subscriptions to most of the softwares out there. And, again, those can provide us with an OEM specification, but sometimes we have to dig a little bit deeper, and we're reaching out to members, for example. I know, Chuck, you're probably our number one guy for the contacts in the industry, and you have friends in your back pocket just about everywhere. And sometimes we have to rely on that in order for them to maybe go with a spec that they've discovered on their own or measured at some point. And that's also helpful.
Right. So, it's probably a good chance to throw this out there because we've used it a lot, and it's always behoove you to record as you're coming down with it. Save yourself some headaches.
Exactly.
By recording before you get it, torn apart in the machine. So record as you go.
Yep. Because I know, and again, we take that call where it's like, well, I just thought you guys would have the spec. Well, unfortunately, it might be a new engine platform and there is no spec yet. So we have to rely on you, the member, to get us that information. And measure before you machine. We can't encourage that more. So on some of those calls that we get, and for the folks out there too that are listening, we also meet as a tech team once a week. Chuck has a learning opportunity. He'll do at least once a week. He'll provide us all with something from a call possibly, or something previous that we need to learn about. So Chuck will spend a few minutes and show us what he has in mind there for what he wants us to know. But also we take those and create what we call weekly call opportunities. And we discuss them because it helps us learn on our end how we need to handle the next calls. As an example, Chuck, I took one that I thought was pretty interesting not that long ago on a Chevy Cruze, and it was a 1.8 liter. And this particular member, they had rebuilt the engine, put it all together, and it got installed. And they didn't do the installation at their facility, but they got it installed, and it had an oil pressure problem. So, of course, the engine comes back out, goes back to the shop. They went through and did their thing. They checked all clearances. Oil pump. Everything literally checked out A-OK. They couldn't figure what was going on. And they came upon some information and asked us if we could look into it about the oil filter housing. And apparently, if you install that oil filter wrong, you can break off a little plastic tab on the top of the cap of the oil filter housing. It falls down because the oil filter bypasses in the bottom of that housing, and it gets wedged in there. So here you go, a case again where, a machine shop does everything right, and it's something not externally that caused the problem. But I thought that was an interesting one that came up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, things that, just you don't look into too deeply until they become a problem. Again, no one ever remembers tiptoeing through the tulips, but they always remember when they had that first bloody nose and things of that nature, so that's why we try to do the bulletins. One of the things that, you mentioned, so if you don't lock that filter into the cap, because it's got little plastic latches that kind of snap into place in the cap, and then you screw it down into the housing. Well, those little latches that are intended to retain the filter into the cap snap off, and that's what got wedged in between the spring and the plate and the bypass assembly. But, those things like that, again, we create tech bulletins, has kind of created a trend where we're getting more and more calls that folks will say, hey, do you have any bulletins on this engine? Not familiar with it. Do I even want to mess with it? If this thing is just laden with problems, I'm a little bit afraid to even touch it. So that's seemingly something that's pretty new. And I think the complexity of the engines and the cost of all the parts and stuff and what you're putting yourself on the hook for has probably driven that. But it's something that, didn't used to talk about.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And another one that I thought was kind of interesting that popped up too was, and this one you've had some involvement in, was the newer Ford 6.7 liter, and folks are putting the oil pumps on, and things aren't too happy because there's no backlash. And of course, Chuck, how I know we created a technical bulletin with that one, but on these newer 6.7s, how are they dealing with that backlash? Like how are they getting that lash that they need?
Well, I think that's the big thing is they didn't even know to check it, right? We get so accustomed to just bolting oil pumps on, and then this thing goes back generations to like some Perkins where the oil pump is driven from, or there's a gear that's driven on the crankshaft, even though you slip the pump over the front of the crank. So now I have to get all of these things aligned, and there is a spec for backlash. But again, people were never asking. They're not looking for that data. It looks pretty simple. A lot of people have gotten by with it until you don't. And we're doing a lot of things with those 6.7s now because like many of the modern diesels, spun main bearing housing bores is a common issue. So if you move the crankshaft center line at all, what is that doing to the oil pump fitment? People in the aftermarket start making a oil pump. What is the fitment? So now we got to be checking, and then we're going to have to find some location that you can shim that pump downward and away from the crankshaft, because you can't have it bound up full interference. You got to have some lash 2 to 7. I'm just making that up right now. Don't follow that number, but that's a pretty typical backlash for those sizes of gears. But anyway, yeah, it's amazing what you don't take anything for granted.
No, exactly. And especially when you think about installing an oil pump, I mean, you do take that for granted. It seems like a fairly straightforward procedure. And, you wouldn't normally check backlash. So that's one to watch out for on the newer 6.7s. Make sure that you've got that proper backlash. And Chuck, the one I really want you to touch base on, and again, this is probably one of the most common calls we get when it comes to fitting piston to wall clearance, is how we deal with those coatings. I know when you look at the spec, especially in some of the specs that we've got from the OEM, it's almost an interference fit. It almost shows a negative number, and it seems awfully, awfully tight. And folks are phoning wondering, well, how do I deal with that? What do I do with, like that doesn't seem right. I shouldn't have to beat this piston in with a hammer, and have it not fit. But just clarify with Chuck, how do we deal with those coatings and what does it mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, it truly is specified on the documentation that it's an interference fit. Now, we all know that can't work, but when you measure, over the coating, then you have the potential of having erroneous numbers. The problem is sometimes they don't have windows to measure the coating, or the window is so small, because in the OEs, when they're, or the piston manufacturers, they have specialized tooling. Usually it's just a little probe tip, and they slide the pistons through this gauge, and the contacts are just, or they're set at the right height, and they pass through those little windows, and everything's fine there. But then we get in the shop, well, we're buying maybe sets of pistons or potentially broken or something. So we need to be able to measure the parts, but over the coatings is nearly impossible. So we don't truly have an interference fit. And then you think about the thermal expansion of the engines and so forth. Yeah, we're not truly dealing with the interference fit, but we are battling that we don't know what that thickness is. There are things that are done, like taking some Scotch-Brite and, and wiping the graphite off until you just get to see the aluminum, and you measure there. And that's probably one of the things that actually works the best. But, the thing about those little windows or doing that's the size point of the piston. So where you need the coating the most at its biggest point, it's where you're taking it off. So, I mean, it's a real challenge. And we know that, MALA versus Federal Mogul versus UEM, they all have different coating styles and choices and thicknesses. So, calling us and saying, well, what number can I add? It doesn't really work that way. We can't speak for them. Now we can make phone calls and we can get some data. And like on some of the pistons, you'll see they say, make the bore this diameter right on top of the piston. That's one of the best references that you can use. That way, they've measured that exact piston, and that's the bore diameter you should match. They're not all like that. It's the sad thing. It would be really nice if they were. Make the world a lot easier for all of us, right?
Exactly. Yep. No, exactly. It is a common call. It is one that we have to explain a fair bit. And we have created a technical bulletin, just, for those that have process, the bulletin is out there, and it basically just explains a lot of what Chuck just mentioned here on the podcast, and try to help you understand how those coatings work and how to establish the clearance. I know most of the aftermarket manufacturers, they'll put what they want for clearance on the piston or on the box or in the instructions. So you kind of have to follow that. I know we're all kind of used to, we'll measure piston and set clearances accordingly, but you do need to follow the aftermarket recommendation for what they're recommending to bore that block to.
Yeah, and when people repackage some of this stuff, that's one of the things we should probably, as an industry, all kind of squawk about. Make sure that they pass that information along when they're repackaging. So usually a set of pistons, they'll put those pretty close together at one size. And that is one of the risks with broken pistons, right? You buy one piston because one was damaged or something like that, is to dimension, because they have tolerances on diameter, and they usually try to get that set pretty close. And then the weight's probably one that is probably often overlooked, because they match the sets of pistons for like automotive passenger car type stuff, plus or minus 2.5 grams. So one set should be within 5 grams, and that's pretty much any supplier. And the diesels are a little bit more than that, but not too far off when you buy it set. So again, think about that when, it's a little caution to buying just individual pistons here and there. You better check the weights and so forth.
No, very, very true. And the last one I wanted that kind of came up here in one of our meetings in the last couple of weeks was a John Deere. And I thought this particular weekly call opportunity I wanted to mention because it goes against our grain on everything we think about. But it was a 13.5 liter John Deere. And we do have a technical bulletin. And the member had called because in the bulletin, it says to remove the valve guides before hot tanking the heads. And again, that kind of goes against, why? Why would you do that? Why is that even a concern? And when you look a little bit into it, and again, I'll let you give the technical reason behind it, Chuck, but that one, to remove those guides before you hot tank a cylinder head was, again, just one of those ones that makes you scratch your head for sure.
Yeah, and I can speak to that from during my time working with MALA. They have when I worked there, they had 27 different valve guide material combinations. So what they've done with valve guides is, there's different classifications of valve stem seals. So we're trying to minimize the amount of oil that passes by the stem seal that can enter the combustion chamber. Well, if you run the guide too dry, then you gall the guide and you have failures. Well, they've developed the materials, these powdered metal guides, where they put lubrication in them at the manufacturing point. And these things basically, they sweat oil. And I have illustrations. I've done presentations at some conferences, and I can share the documentation. And that's what drove us to go ahead and do the bulletin to share that data. But the fact that these valve guides, what they do when they come up to temperature, they sweat the oil out. As they cool down, they draw oil back into it. So the material's very oilophilic, just like the moly in a ring face. So by design, so that you don't have to run a stem seal that allows so much oil to be metered by. There's 5 classifications of one being very loose, allowing a lot of oil movement, but about everything today is class 5. They don't want any oil hardly at all going down the stem seals. So anyway, you have to find a way. Well, if you put that in a caustic solution, hot tank, whatever, then you sweat that all out, then your opportunity to have a pretty quick valve guide seizure is heightened by the fact that you took the lubrication away. And it might absorb some nasty chemical too, that's corrosive or whatever. So you don't want something corrosive that you're purposely putting out at the interface between the guide and the stem and causing further issues.
Right. I mean, it's not normally how you would, it's not a process or, when you get that call and they're like, okay, well, we stuck valves, and then we have to come back to them and say, well, did you clean the heads? Well, yeah, dummy. Of course we cleaned the heads, but did you clean it without the guides in? That's the question, so that it's always stuff to learn. I mean, that's the thing again, for us on this end, we're always learning. And that was one that caught my attention for sure.
Yeah. I got one that I want to share that I actually just kind of got on last night. I seen something, and we take this call on the tech line, and I think it's a good opportunity to share it. So if a lot of blocks now are like a hybrid where the main caps are the bed plate, if we, want to use that jargon. So the block is split in half right through the crank line, but you have to seal that. So now I have all of this area that has to be sealed off, right? So the bed plate has oil pan that bolts to it. So you have potential for leaks in the front, the rear. They have oftentimes a T-joint because the block is split in two right through the crank line. And then I got a timing cover the bolts to the front. So I got to worry about all that seal. But what I don't want to do is put something in at that intersection in the middle of the block and the main line and create oil clearance. Well, a lot of RTVs have fillers in them to increase the density, the tear strength, and so forth. And one of those fillers is bentonite clay. So if anyone is familiar with ever fixing a pond dam or drilling a water well or oil well or whatever, they use bentonite clay and they create a slurry and it stacks up. And if you look at this stuff, if anyone's ever seen one of those mud dauber, dirt daubers, This stuff stacks up, it sticks to itself, and it forms a rigid surface or wall really quick. So if I put that in those fillers, and then based on the size of the particle that's in there, if I put that in RTV, do you think I'm ever going to get that thing to bolt together, that I have the oil clearances that I should have? And now we fight for a half a thousandths like crazy, right? For us, a half a thousandths is big. I mean, that's from 20-yard line to the end zone. I mean, that's a big distance. We don't want to give up a half a thousandths. And then with bearing crush and stuff like that, I don't want to give up a half thousandth. So what if I already hung that block to the high side and then I use RTV? So there's things out there. They're flange gasket eliminator gasket makers. And again, only because I know these part numbers, I'm not promoting Loctite. I just know the numbers. But they have like a 518 or a 515. Like 518 can be used in one. Say if you want to do a repair in a vehicle and there's a little bit of oil present, it still works better. It'll set up. So it's an anaerobic flange gasket sealant. And so, that's something that I've taken that call multiple times. And I think the reason I'm taking it multiple times is somebody talks to somebody and they keep calling me back and getting smart. But I thought it'd be interesting just to share that, the RTV sometimes has fillers in it, and it's that bentonite clay is one of the common things. And quite honestly, go back to old conventional head gaskets. That stuff's been around. It's used for all kinds of stuff. So bentonite clay was mixed with the fibers, and so that they would call paper clay fiber head gaskets with the armor that folds over. So they use bentonite clay there. The stuff is tough, it's durable, and it's doing its job. So you don't want that in between your bed plate and your block.
No, that's a good one. And like you say, when you're fighting for clearance, and that is a question that does come up, how do you deal with that, knowing that you have to seal those bed plates and put an RTV or a sealant in there? How do you account for that? So, just add more, right? Isn't that the old saying, you can never use enough silicone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right. A little good, a lot's better.
That's
like
right.
Steve just sent something around about that this morning.
He did. Yeah. No, that's pretty funny for sure. So, and then speaking of that, if any of you listeners ever have any ideas, if you've got something that you want us to research, you got a topic that you want us to talk about on the podcast or anything like that, by all means, let us know. There is a podcast email address that we use. It's eppodcast@aera.org. And like I say, any ideas for what we're speaking on, if you want us to research a topic or something that, you want Chuck to mention in some of his technical stuff, just let us know. We're always looking for ideas and we're always looking for feedback. So let us know in there.
And Rob, I think I would add to that, since we're doing, of course you can listen to these audio only if you choose, but since we're doing video, it gives us more latitude to talk more technical when we need visual illustration. So keep that in mind. Now that we're doing the video, we can bring more of the visuals in. It helps tell the tale. They say picture says 1,000 words, and that's a fact. If you can put a visual reference to things, it sure helps to understand how and why.
Exactly. And I know you've got an office full of visuals there. You've got all kinds of stuff just laying around that you could, that you can speak on and stuff. So for the listeners, by all means, anything you want us to look up or talk about, shoot us an email in that EP podcast email, and we'll speak on that. And Chuck, that time flies when you're just across the desk like we are 2,000 miles away, just chit-chatting back and forth. Things go pretty quick. So we have a saying sort of when we end meetings, it's always, well, back to the puzzle factory. So for those of you listening, we appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in. You can subscribe to our podcast. If you're listening, as well as we have a YouTube page you can subscribe to. So we encourage you to do that as well. And thank you again for listening. Much appreciated. So Chuck, until next month, that's it, man.
Till then, adios, Rob.
See you later.